They found his teeth before they found his name. Tucked beneath a ripped tarp inside a frozen Brooklyn garage, the remains looked less human and more like discarded meat. Fingers twisted in duct tape. Molars scattered near a cracked drain. The ice did little to mask the smell. It was Roy DeMeo's signature, precise, ruthless, industrial. Roy sat across the street in a Cadillac Coupe de Ville, coffee in hand, watching his crew sweep up like janitors after a blood opera. Chris Rosenberg stood nervously near the drain. "You want we clean now or wait till dark?" he asked. Roy didn't answer. He stared through the windshield like a priest awaiting confession. Joseph, Testa, and Anthony Center dragged the last bag toward the freezer. Inside, the Gemini lounge was quiet. No music, just the hum of refrigeration and history. 17 bodies that winter. And Roy wasn't even breaking a sweat. Before the blood, before the cold silence of kill rooms, Roy DeMeo was just a kid from Canarsie. Poor, angry, invisible. He saw the Cadillacs first, slick black machines driven by men with rings on every finger. He followed them with his eyes until he followed them with his feet. Loan sharking in locker rooms, stripping cars before math class, Roy was ambitious. But he needed more than cash. He needed reputation. And in Brooklyn, reputation was paid for in blood. Paul Castellano didn't shake hands with nobodies. But Roy wasn't a nobody for long. Nino Gaggi brought him in. The soft-spoken killer who saw Roy not for who he was, but for what he could become. Gaggi said, "You think like us. Now, act like us." And so Roy did. The Gemini Lounge was Roy's kingdom. On the outside, neon lights, jukebox music, cheap beer. On the inside, silence, bleach, death. The back room wasn't advertised. No one walked in there unless Roy wanted them to, and no one walked out. He chose his crew carefully. Joseph, Testa, and Anthony Center, butcher boys in spirit and strength. And Chris Rosenberg, angry and eager, loyal to the bone. They didn't question. They just worked. The first body came on a Wednesday. A car thief who asked the wrong question. Rosenberg shot him in the back of the head. Testa drained him like a mechanic pulling oil. Roy watched. "Don't blink," he said. "Blinking's for victims." They called it the Gemini method. A process, not a murder. First, lure them in. Second, headshot, fast and silent. Third, a towel pressed tight to stifle sound. Fourth, cut the arteries and hang them upside down. Then came the knives. Testa handled the arms. Center did the legs. Roy preferred the chest cavity. "Like splitting firewood," he once said. They wore butcher's aprons over street clothes. The blood washed off easy with enough bleach. No fingerprints. No teeth. No faces. Landfills swallowed the torsos. The sea took the rest. Without names, there could be no questions. And without questions, Roy thrived. By day, Roy DeMeo was a husband, a father, a man who kissed his kids goodnight and shoveled snow from his driveway. His neighbors said he was quiet, generous, always waved, always smiled. But behind the smile was something else. He'd burn his clothes in the basement furnace. He kept a second freezer in the garage. For meat, he told his wife. She never looked. Maybe she knew. One night, his daughter asked, "Why do you smell like Clorox, Daddy?" He knelt down, smiled. "Cleaning up messes, sweetheart." And she went back to bed. Roy wasn't hiding. He was balancing. A life in halves, one with lullabies, one with screams. Business was booming, but Roy wanted more. He didn't just want to kill, he wanted to industrialize murder. The Gemini Lounge became a factory. It didn't sleep. Victims came in, meat went out. No emotions. No delays. But with growth came eyes. The FBI, the NYPD, even other families. Paul Castellano didn't like attention. He liked clean money, not rivers of blood. Roy's body count was drawing too much heat. Still, Roy believed he was untouchable. If we keep making money, he told Gaggy, nobody's gonna care where the bodies go. Gaggy gave him a warning glance. They will if the bodies float. But Roy didn't listen. He started moving guns, drugs, anything that paid. The crew followed, grinning through bloodied gloves. Their kingdom had no walls, only freezers. Chris Rosenberg was Roy's wild card, reckless, trigger-happy, fiercely loyal. He saw Roy as a father figure, even called him "Unce" when drunk. But loyalty without control is a lit fuse. Chris had a temper. He shot a Cuban drug dealer over a botched deal. A man tied to the Colombians. That man's death brought down hell. The Colombians wanted retribution, and they wanted it loud. Paul Castellano issued an order, clean up the mess. That meant Chris. Roy went pale when Gaggy delivered the news. He's your mess. Fix it, Gaggy said coldly. Roy called Chris to the lounge. They had a drink, laughed, watched the jukebox spin a Sinatra tune. Then Roy nodded. A shot rang out from behind. Chris didn't see it coming. Loyalty had a shelf life. Roy wasn't the same after Chris. He buried the body, but not the guilt. He'd stare at his hands like they didn't belong to him. The others noticed, especially Center. "Boss don't blink no more," Center whispered. "He just stares like he's dead inside." But business didn't stop. Roy doubled down. Wonder style. More weapons. More deals. More killings. The Gemini crew now had a network. Stolen cars moved through chop shops, drugs through pizza parlors, guns through laundromats. And when problems arose, bodies disappeared. They joked about it over drinks. "We're the real sanitation department," Testa said, raising his glass. Roy didn't laugh. He went home that night, kissed his wife, sat at the dinner table, and saw Chris Rosenberg's blood on his steak knife. The ghost wouldn't leave. The FBI had a nickname for Roy's crew, the Murder Machine. Files piled up with missing persons, truck drivers, drug dealers, small-time thieves, all last seen near the Gemini Lounge. No leads, no bodies, no hope. But Agent Dominic Montiglio wasn't giving up. A former mob insider turned Fed, he knew how these men operated. He drew circles around Roy's crew, connected names, noticed patterns. He said, "It's not random, it's a rhythm. These men have a ritual." Montiglio started knocking on doors. Friends of victims. Families. The trail led to Gaggy, and through Gaggy, to Roy. The Bureau didn't just want an arrest. They wanted to collapse the whole empire. Roy could feel the noose tightening, but he kept killing. A machine doesn't know how to stop. Pressure builds like gas in a sealed drum, silent until it explodes. Roy's crew was under heat from every side. Castellano's patience thinned. The Feds were close. The Colombians were still watching. Then came the whispers, "Someone's talking." Roy turned paranoid. He stared too long at Testa. Questioned Center's loyalty. Watched every gesture like it was a betrayal. "We got a rat," he told the crew. "And rats don't get mercy." But what Roy didn't know, the betrayal wouldn't come from the crew. It would come from his own blood. His cousin, Dominic Montiglio, was the one feeding the Feds. Roy's legacy was cracking. Not from force, from within. Roy stopped sleeping. He paced his hallway at night, gun in hand, listening for sounds that weren't there. His phone rang once at 3 a.m. No voice, just breathing. "Who's there?" he barked. Silence. Then, a click. By morning, he had his crew sweep the Gemini Lounge from top to bottom. He tore into walls, searched for wires. Nothing. No bugs. But still, he felt watched. "I smell a ghost," he muttered to Testa. "Ghosts don't talk, Roy," Testa said. Then, why can I hear? Im. He watched Center like he'd forgotten who he was. Accused Rosenberg's old girlfriend of snitching from beyond the grave. Paranoia was rotting him faster than guilt ever could. The murder machine was still running, but the man who built it was breaking down. Dominic Montiglio stared at the wiretap transcript in his hands. Roy's voice, cold and cutting, listing debts, murders, movements. Evidence wrapped in calm commands. Every sentence, another brick in the cell being built for him. Dominic didn't want this. Roy was family. But blood didn't shield you from truth. Not when the corpses stacked up. He told the feds, "I'll give you names, I'll give you everything. But no deals unless my mother walks." They agreed. Dominic lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. He was a monster, he whispered, but he still let me sit on his lap when I was 5. The guilt would last a lifetime. But the silence couldn't. Word got out that someone inside was flipping. Castellano sent feelers. The Gambino boss didn't like surprises. Roy was a cash machine, yes, but messy. Too many bodies. Too many whispers. Gaggy met Roy outside a church parking lot. The tension was thick as the fog rolling in from the bay. "You gotta step back," Gaggy warned. "Lay low. Let this cool." Roy's jaw clenched. "You want me to stop working? I want you breathing." Roy leaned against his car, staring up at the crucifix on the church wall. "If I go quiet, they'll still hear me scream." And in that moment, even Gaggy knew. Roy DeMeo wasn't going to fade away. He was going to explode. Roy began cleaning up. Not crime scenes, his trail. He burned ledgers. Shredded photos. Called old associates and delivered cold warnings. "If I go down, you go first." The crew saw the shift. The ritual killings slowed. The freezer sat empty for days. Testa said, "Never seen him this quiet. It's scarier than when he's slicing." Roy walked into the lounge one night, looked around and whispered, "This place smells like endings." He was planning something. He started checking exits, routes, even asked Center if he knew someone who could forge IDs. He wasn't just paranoid now. He was preparing to run. But it was already too late. One cold morning, Gaggy got a call. Castellano wanted Roy gone. Not arrested. Not warned. Gone. "His blood is cheaper than the heat he's bringing," Castellano said. Gaggy didn't argue. Roy's own mentor now held the knife. The crew wasn't told. They didn't need to be. Roy, sensing the shift, began carrying 2 guns. One at the ankle. One at the waist. "I trust no one," he said to himself, loading the chambers. He looked in the mirror, stared hard. "They're coming." And they were. Not with sirens. Not with subpoenas. But with silence and gloves. The indictment list was longer than a butcher's receipt. Wire fraud. Extortion. Interstate racketeering. But what kept the agents awake were the murders. Over 70 suspected victims tied to Roy's crew. No bodies, just voids. Dominic Montiglio sat across from prosecutors. Tape recorders clicked. Dow. He listed names like prayers. Roy, Testa, Center. All of them. He ran the Gemini like a slaughterhouse. The FBI began building the biggest RICO case Brooklyn had ever seen. Surveillance intensified. Witnesses were flipped. Warrants whispered in dark corridors. And Roy. He was still trying to make deals. He reached out to friends in Jersey. Offered silence for sanctuary. But no one wanted the devil at their table. Even evil when too loud becomes a liability. Roy met with Gaggy one last time. Not at a diner. Not at the lounge. A cemetery. The two stood between headstones, winter wind scraping their faces. "You brought this," Gaggy said, eyes hollow. "You flew too close." Roy lit a cigarette, hands trembling just slightly. "You used me." Gaggy didn't deny it. Roy stepped closer. I buried 100 men for this family. And now the family wants to bury you, Gaggy said flatly. Silence stretched. Then Gaggy turned, walked away, coat flapping like wings. Roy stayed, alone among the dead, smoke curling from his lips. He knew now. There was no mercy for a man who taught death how to multiply. Roy started writing things down. Names. Dates. Drop sites. A ledger of sin scrawled in a brown leather notebook, hidden under the floorboards of his garage. If I go, someone's going with me, he muttered. He began to spiral, calling the lounge 3 times an hour, checking if the freezer still worked. He started following his own crew in unmarked cars. One night, he thought he saw Testa meeting with a Fed. He nearly shot him in the street. Testa laughed it off. "You're seeing ghosts, Roy." But Roy wasn't laughing. He stopped sleeping at home. Slept in his car, engine running, doors locked. He stopped kissing his kids goodnight. The man who used to disappear bodies had become a shadow himself. One of Roy's oldest associates, Vito Arena, disappeared. Word was he'd flipped. Others started distancing themselves. The Gemini lounge sat mostly empty now, its jukebox silent, freezer humming like a dying heart. Center stopped showing up. Testa returned calls late. The loyalty Roy built in blood was fading in whispers. He tried one last job, a hijacked truck from Jersey. The driver vanished. But the truck was found the next day, untouched. It was a setup. Roy exploded, smashing the lounge backroom mirror. "They're testing me!" But no one answered. His crew, his protection, even his fear, all gone, quiet. Only the freezer stayed loyal. And it too waited in silence. It happened on January 10th, 1983. Roy DeMeo was supposed to meet his crew. He left the house in his tan Cadillac. He never came home. Days passed. Then they found the car in the parking lot of the Nautilus Health Club. Roy's body was in the trunk, frozen solid, a bullet in his head, his hands folded over his chest. The murder machine had turned inward. The crew he built, the empire he funded, the family he served. All of them had delivered the final hit. He died like the men he buried, wrapped in plastic, cold, silent, forgotten. But his ghost, that stayed. In every drain, every freezer hum, every silence in a room where death once danced. The funeral was quiet. No priest. No open casket. Just a few relatives pretending they didn't know the truth. Roy's wife wept silently. His son stared at the ground, fists clenched, tie crooked. Not a single Gambino showed up. No flowers from Gaggy. No phone call. Nothing. It was as if Roy DeMeo had never existed. But one man did come, Dominic Montecleo. He stood in the back, trench coat soaked in snow, face blank. He didn't come to grieve. He came to confirm. Roy was really gone. Dominic whispered to no one in particular, "There's no retirement plan for ghosts." Then he vanished into the flurry, a man who helped dismantle the empire that raised him. After Roy's death, the Gemini lounge closed for good. The door was padlocked, the neon sign unplugged. But the building remained, like a haunted tooth in the mouth of Brooklyn. Locals avoided the sidewalk. Kids dared each other to touch the door. Inside, everything was frozen in time. The bar stools, the jukebox, even the freezer, sealed but never emptied. One cop who entered said, "The air still smelled like bleach and gunpowder." No one bought the property. No one knocked it down. It sat there, decaying quietly, whispering stories to the bricks. And every whisper said the same thing. This place fed on blood. And now, it starves. The trial came next. Feds unleashed an avalanche. Dozens of charges. Photos. Ledgers. Testimonies from men who once toasted with Roy, now swearing under oath. Center. Testa, Day, Gaggy, all named, all cornered. Some pled, some ran, one died, some flipped. The courtroom smelled of stale coffee and dread. Jurors shifted when the photos came out, duct-taped limbs, freezer interiors, teeth in evidence bags. The prosecutor said, this wasn't just murder. It was process. It was policy. When asked how many Roy killed, one agent replied, we stopped counting after 100. The judge didn't flinch. He banged the gavel. The gavel echoed like a bullet. And the murder machine officially ended. Anthony Center and Joseph Testa were given life sentences. No parole. No ceremony. They were locked away in Supermax, concrete tombs lit by flickering fluorescence. Testa stopped speaking after sentencing. Center scribbled Bible verses on his cell wall with a pencil stub. In prison they weren't feared. They were forgotten. Sometimes the guards whispered, these guys used to make people disappear. Now, they couldn't even get toothpaste on time. They aged fast. Faces once hard turned to wax. Hands that once held blades now trembled over plastic lunch trays. Legends reduced to echoes in cinder block. And Gaggy? He survived a few more years. Moved slower. Smoked more. Watched the news as his name got buried beneath fresher scandals. They tried to indict him again. He laughed. You can't arrest a ghost twice. He died in a hospital bed. No hand to hold. No family in the room. Just the soft beep of a heart monitor. Outside, the wind howled through Brooklyn's alleyways. A generation had passed. The Gemini Lounge was rubble now. No plaque. No warning. Just silence. But sometimes, in the coldest winters, a few old men swore they heard the hum of a freezer down the block. And in that hum, a name. Roy died. Brooklyn never spoke Roy's name again. Not in bars. Not in courtrooms. Not in whispers. But the neighborhoods remembered. Old men sipping coffee outside bakeries flinched when Cadillacs rolled slow. Sons asked fathers why the alley near Avenue N stayed fenced off. No one answered. In Canarsie, a boy found a buried box behind an abandoned garage. Inside were Polaroids. Men tied to chairs. A freezer. Blood on tile. He turned it in. The detective who reviewed them closed the file and muttered, we don't dig up ghosts. Some stories don't end. They just wait. And the air around the Gemini's grave never fully cleared. It stayed heavy. As if the walls once soaked in blood were still bleeding through time. Roy's son grew up in silence. He never changed his last name. Never spoke to reporters. He worked at a body shop in Queens. Fixed dents. Repainted doors. Never smiled much. When people asked, you related to that DeMeo guy? He'd say, no idea. But one night, alone in his garage, he opened a drawer. Inside, a folded photo, Roy holding him as a toddler, both laughing. He stared at it for a long time, fingers trembling. Then he set it on fire. Watched the corners curl black. Watched his father's face melt into ash. That night he didn't sleep. Just sat by the garage window, listening. Some ghosts don't speak. They just breathe behind your neck when you think you're alone. Law enforcement called it a victory. Files were closed. RICO was redefined. Agents got promotions. Headlines faded. But the detectives who worked the DeMeo case carried it like lead. One retired with insomnia. Another drank herself into a divorce. One left a note. I saw too much and stopped feeling anything. They didn't remember just the evidence. They remembered the smell. The frozen blood. The sound a body makes when dropped in plastic. Years later, a rookie asked one of them, was it true? Over 100? The detective just stared forward and whispered, it wasn't the number that haunted me. It was how easy they made it look. Some victories feel like funerals in disguise. Anthony's center found religion behind bars. He baptized himself in a prison sink, spoke of redemption, of judgment, of voices in the dark. He claimed Roy visited him in dreams. He never talks, Center told a prison chaplain. He just watches, bleeding but smiling. Some called it a psychotic break. Others said it was guilt. Center began writing letters, hundreds of pages, confessions, sermons, paranoia wrapped in ink. None were mailed. One day, a guard opened his Bible and found a list of names, victims never linked to DeMeo. Center looked up and said, "He's still counting. Every night, I hear him whisper the number." Then he laughed. It didn't sound human. Decades later, a documentary aired. The Murder Machine, glossy titles, dramatized voiceovers, slow piano over victim photos. Ratings soared. People gasped, tweeted, debated body counts over coffee. Actors played killers. A replica of the Gemini Lounge was built on a soundstage in LA. A producer said, "It's not horror, it's history." But history, when filmed with perfect lighting, forgets the smell of bleach, the pulse of fear, the weight of silence. Dominic Montiglio refused interviews. Roy's family declined comment. And somewhere in Brooklyn, a freezer sat in a junkyard, door rusted shut. A boy walked by once and stopped. He stared at it, then walked away. That was enough. They never found all the bodies. Landfills swallowed some. The ocean took others. But there were whispers, basements never searched, foundations poured over bones, freezers sold, and never opened. Years later, a plumber in Flatlands cracked through concrete for a repair and hit something hard. Teeth. The forensics confirmed it. Human remains, early 1980s. No ID. No family ever filed a missing persons report. The city logged it, tagged it, buried it again. Another forgotten name in a forgotten war. Roy had promised his crew, no one will ever find them. And he was right. They didn't find all of them. Just enough to remember. Because the Gemini method wasn't just a killing style. It was an erasure. Dominic Montiglio never returned to Brooklyn. He moved west, changed numbers, lived quiet. But sometimes at night, he'd pull out a cassette tape from a locked drawer, Roy's voice, grainy and cold. "Do it quick." Then drain him, always the neck first. He didn't play it often, just enough to remind himself why he testified. He'd light a cigarette, stare into the desert darkness outside his trailer and whisper, "You're still in there, aren't you?" He wasn't asking Roy. He was asking himself. Because when you grow up in a house built on murder, the walls don't just hold secrets. They hold you too. In a university criminology class, a professor clicked through slides, the Gemini Lounge, Roy's mugshot, body count estimates. A student raised their hand. Why didn't anyone stop him sooner? The professor didn't answer immediately. She just clicked to the next image, a smiling Roy in a suburban backyard with his kids. Then she said, "Because monsters don't always look like monsters." The class fell silent. Because that's the real horror, not the blood, not the bodies. It's the calm, the routines, the morning paper and evening massacre, the hug before school and dismemberment after lunch. Evil doesn't need to hide. It just needs to be charming. The Gemini Lounge was finally demolished. Bricks crushed, pipes ripped, walls torn. No ceremony, no plaque, no protest. A condo rose in its place, chrome balconies, granite countertops, staged smiles and brochures. But the foundation ran deep. Some nights tenants claimed they heard dripping in the walls. Others complained of freezer hums when no appliances were running. No one stayed long in Unit 3B. A real estate agent once joked, "You can't gentrify ghosts." She never returned the key. Because concrete remembers. And places soaked in blood don't forget the sound. The building stood tall, but the ground beneath it whispered. Roy DeMeo never imagined legacy. He imagined power, silence, obedience, died well. But what he left behind wasn't fear, it was echo. In broken families. In lost names. In cops who drank to forget. In children who grew up learning what not to ask. He died in a trunk. But his blueprint lives. Every cartel with a system. Every mob with a method. Every gang that dismembers to erase. Roy taught the underworld how to disappear a man completely. And so when the freezer hums, when the drain gurgles, when the streetlight flickers behind a warehouse, that's not just the wind. It's Roy. Still working.